The cat wanted to be more involved with this video because I have left her out of the last few, and it has apparently made her sad or something. But I think the real reason is that this build is called the Lunchbox, and she is confused and thinks there is food involved. Either way, we will be letting her participate. Ugh, hooray, I guess.
Hooray!
Today we will be going over the parts and the performance of a PC the size of a lunchbox. Is such a tiny form factor PC viable, and can the parts we chose handle the heat? That is what we are here to find out.
ITX, of course, stands for Itty Tiny PC X. The X is silent.
No, it stands for Information Technology Extended. Do not tell them the wrong information.
How do you know it's wrong?
Why would the X be silent?
Because nobody wants to deal with Elon.
Today we will be going over the parts and the performance of a PC the size of a lunchbox. Is such a tiny form factor PC viable, and can the parts we chose handle the heat? That is what we are here to find out. All right, Kat? Now is your chance. Say something to everyone about the computer.
Mitochondria are the powerhouse of the cell.
You were supposed to say something about the computer build.
But computers don't even have mitochondria.
Right, moving on. I suppose the best place to start is to list off the parts. Not counting tax, the build came to around $820. All the parts were new except for the graphics card. We got the mighty 12GB 6700 XT, which was not viewed favorably when it first launched at its price point, but it has become a great budget card as time has gone on. We got it off of eBay. It was listed as for parts and not working for $140. Saya, however, ignored this and gambled on the fact it would work and offered $105. The seller accepted, and as it turns out, she was correct. The card was basically new, for you see, the original purchaser of this GPU had bought it when it first came out in 2021, and before they even owned it for a week, they returned it saying it did not work. Since then, it has sat on the seller's shelf. The seller, having no way to test it, had it sit on their shelf from 2021 until its eBay listing in later 2024. Saya's gamble, then, was that the original buyer lied, and either had buyer's remorse or was able to get a different card, since there were GPU shortages at this time and GPU prices were insane. And Saya's gamble paid off. The card came in its original packaging, and the card and packaging itself were absolutely pristine and looked brand new. The gremlin cat put the card into her fish tank PC that she keeps using as a test bench, the poor thing, and after a couple minutes the PC posted and the GPU was given a second life. The temps were a bit high, but after a repaste and some thermal pads, plus a nice fan curve, there was no problems.
I watched Tech Jesus, and he roasted the shit out of the 6700 XT's launch. He also said where they should have thermal pads, so I added them there too.
Did you just say Tech Jesus?
Tech Jesus.
Pretty easy to take apart, but otherwise very lazy, and AMD should have tried harder. So that's it for this teardown. Pretty disappointing for just the amount of money. It's completely absurd how little of that went into the video card itself. This is an extremely standard design. There's zero special about this design, and they're not even, I mean, just there's, like, between the base plate and the heatsink, or the back plate and the PCB, there's places this could be improved that would be very easy and show at least some baseline level of care for what people are buying.
Our motherboard is the Gigabyte A520i AC. This is one of the cheaper ITX motherboards, but it works fine. I have no complaints. Well, actually I do. It only has one NVMe slot. My AliExpress ITX motherboard in my Calico build has two, so that does suck. You can watch that video if you are interested in buying a motherboard and CPU from AliExpress. Right, where was I? Oh yes, the A520i AC motherboard comes with Wi-Fi and 2 RAM slots. I am going to be honest, I don't know a lot about motherboards to get into more details.
It works good well.
For our CPU, we got a Ryzen 5800X, which admittedly is not a great choice for such a small form factor and tiny cooler. This CPU is known for running hot and can consume a good deal of power. To help deal with this issue, I went to the BIOS and undervolted the CPU. On some newer AMD motherboards, you can just apply Eco Mode. Eco Mode is a feature that allows users to lower the TDP, which helps reduce thermal heat and power draw without much performance loss. However, this motherboard does not have that feature, but the undervolt I applied will do the same thing. The CPU can still run a bit on the spicier side, but it is within its normal operating temperatures. AMD says this is fine. Our RAM came bundled with our CPU, which is 32 gigabytes of 3200 MHz Corsair Vengeance. There is not much else to say here. It's just a solid kit of DDR4 RAM and will do the job. The bundle cost $189, so not bad. Our PSU is a Lian 850-watt SFX PSU. Saying the price out loud hurts me, but it will be in the description if you care to look. It was the single most expensive part in this system, as is tradition with ITX power supplies. The case is the S300. I got it on Amazon for $100, but you can actually find it cheaper on AliExpress. The case is tiny, and I mean tiny. I don't think pictures really do it justice for just how small it is. It really is a lunchbox. When building in this case, you have to plan out your steps ahead of time, or you will have to take things apart to put other things in first. Some tips for anyone planning a build in this case. Slot the riser cable through the gap in the case before you put the motherboard in. Also, I would connect the riser cable to the motherboard before you fully screw it down. Plug in the power supply cables to the motherboard before placing it into the case. Then, when you are ready, plug the other end of the cables into the PSU before you mount the power supply into the case. You can put a 120mm slim fan and a 80mm slim fan at the bottom of the case, which will help with airflow, and I would highly recommend it. Also to note, the riser cable that comes with the case is 3.0, not 4.0, but you can buy one if needed. According to the case manufacturer, 305mm is the max GPU length this case can fit. But I tried putting a 303mm ASRock RX 6750 XT Challenger Pro in, and I had to take out most of the screws holding the case together and stretch the metal to get it in. And I was terrified of breaking something. I would be weary of trying anything bigger. Also, fun fact, you will not be able to plug the GPU into the riser cable once it is in the case. You have to plug that in first and then put the graphics card in. Needless to say, getting the 6700 XT reference model into the case was a lot easier. This GPU is 267mm. The CPU cooler is the Thermalright AXP90X47. It comes with a 92mm slim fan, and I paid extra for it to be copper. Copper is an excellent conductor of heat and has one of the highest thermal conductivity of any engineering metal. You get what you pay for, so I would not cheap out here. The downside is that Thermalright decided to use the ugliest colored fan for their copper version. Also, fun fact, their listing on Amazon has a typo, and instead of copper, it says Cooper. Who the hell is Cooper? We will be testing on a 1440p 144Hz monitor and a 1080p secondary monitor. Before we start with the benchmarks, we need to establish this computer's baselines. The CPU idles at 52 to 54 Celsius with lots of random spikes in temperature, as is tradition with the 5800X. The GPU idles at 40. Right, with all that out of the way, let's get to the games. Battlefield ran excellent. There was a few issues, but nothing related to the PC's performance itself. For one, MSI's overlay would not display in-game, so I had to use AMD's built-in overlay within its Adrenalin software. Sadly, I did not realize until after that this overlay did not get recorded, but that was as easy as toggling a setting. The other issue I ran into was with the recording itself, and that was that the recording was heavily saturated and dark, even though that was not the case in the actual gameplay. Looking it up online, this seems to be an issue with Battlefield 1, caused by either tabbing out or changing settings once the game is launched. Or apparently just launching the game. Thanks a lot, EA. Maybe the non-dark recording option is a DLC? Running the game in windowed rather than full screen seemed to fix this issue, however. We did lose some FPS, but it was a non-issue. Speaking of issues, the last problem we had was Sire's skills. Do you know how hard it is to get good benchmarks and seeing how the game performs when Sire is constantly dying and in the respawn menu? I think she went like 1 in 17 in one match. Despicable. I first ran the game on all medium settings, but switched to Ultra since the game ran so well. On Ultra we got over 140 FPS with GPU temperatures sat around 74 to 77 Celsius and CPU temps around 80 to 82 Celsius. While on paper these temps are very high, for a small form factor lunchbox, we take this. Besides, AMD says that the 5800X can operate around 90 Celsius. If the CPU could talk, I am sure it would say, "This is fine." Overall, besides some hiccups recording and Sire's skill issues, Battlefield 1 ran marvelously. Running the Cyberpunk benchmarks with various settings, I have never heard the Lunchbox fans spin so loudly or seen its temps reach so high. Testing with no frame generation seemed to really heat up this system. The GPU reached a max of 85 Celsius, which is the warmest I have seen it yet, and the CPU got up to 90 Celsius. Only slightly worrying. Although we have the CPU undervolted, it is a very light undervolt, so you could take it further and run it around 65 watts if you desire. For example, at my current BIOS settings, the max the CPU will now pull is 90 watts, as opposed to the normal 105 watts. Overall, for these benchmarks, the GPU at 80 Celsius and the CPU at 85 Celsius seem to be the norm. However, with FrameGen on in the benchmark, the GPU at highest hit 74 Celsius. The CPU, however, still was reaching 90 Celsius. According to AMD, this is still considered fine, so if it bothers you, turn off the benchmarks and just pretend you saw nothing. Nothing to see here. I ran the benchmarks using the in-game presets, and as I cycled through low to ultra, I ran the benchmark at each tier with FrameGen both on and off, with resolution scaling on and off, and with ray tracing on and off, and combinations of each. I will not waste your time going through each, but I will list them here. Feel free to pause and see all the benchmarks. Overall, and ignoring some of the temps that I will now label as ITX standard, this is fine, Cyberpunk runs well on this system. Even without FrameGen or resolution scaling, you can play this game just fine. For Fortnite, I let the game itself determine my graphic settings. It put me at TSR medium with high settings and epic view distance. I then turned off VSync and put the frames to unlimited. Frame-wise, we had a low of 95 to a high of 169, but mostly we sat between 120 to 144 FPS. Temperature-wise, the CPU sat around 80 to 81 Celsius. I didn't see it go above 82. The GPU sat around 71 to 73 Celsius, with a high of 74. With this system, you have plenty of room to turn the settings up higher if you wanted to, but in my opinion, the game runs and looks good already on these settings, and I would just play it here. Oh, right. The cat also wanted me to mention that she won and got a victory royal while testing this. Honestly, she has so much to make up for with that Battlefield performance, but good for her, I guess. How can we test out a PC the size of a console without playing one of the most iconic console game series? The answer, of course, is we cannot. That would just not do. I am, of course, talking about Halo. For Halo Reach, with all the settings on max, we reached 400 plus FPS at some points, with a low of 125. Overall, though, we sat around 200 to 300 FPS, with some dips below 200. Temp-wise, the CPU sat around 82 to 84 Celsius, and the GPU was hanging around 65 to 70, with a high of 73 Celsius. For a PC the size of a lunchbox, good luck to any console competing with this system. We could run Hitman on ultra settings with ray tracing and get over 100 plus FPS. I only noticed the frames dip below 100 a few times while playing, but it was a non-issue. Surprisingly, there seemed to be no difference in performance with ray tracing on. Or so I thought until I realized that besides enabling ray tracing before starting the game, you also have to enable it within the game settings by turning on ray tracing reflections and ray tracing shadows. Turning these on, my FPS dropped to around 20. Right, so we will go ahead and just keep those off and let me restart. We could run Hitman on ultra settings without ray tracing and get over 100 plus frames per second. The GPU reached up to 76 Celsius but hovered around 71 to 74. The CPU sat around 81 to 83, but I did see a random spike of 87 Celsius when loading into a level. Either way, Hitman ran very well. Another title conquered by the might of the Lunchbox. Running Red Dead Redemption 2 on ultra settings with no FSR, we averaged 65 FPS with a max of 95 and a minimum of 30 in the built-in benchmark. By the end of the test, our GPU's max temperature was 74 Celsius and our CPU reached 84. Turning FSR on and setting it to quality, the average FPS was 75 with a high of 109 and a low of 31. The CPU and GPU temps were about the same. In both cases, we averaged over 60 FPS, and to me that is playable. Of course, you can always tweak some settings for better frames, and to your preferences, but I leave that up to your own discretion. Yeehaw, partner! Running World of Warcraft on the medium highs 7 out of 10 in-game graphics slider, the game ran very well. In the main city of the current expansion, our FPS ranged from 60 to 90 frames. But most systems struggle here. Outside of the city, we hit upwards of 250 frames, which is very nice. In raids, while fighting the boss with all the PvE and player effects, we reached around 70 to 100 FPS. Of course, while not fighting the boss, our frames would climb back up. What can I say? WoW was enjoyable. There are no issues here. However, what should be said, and what I say every time we test a system for this game, WoW is poorly optimized and can be heavily CPU-orientated, and as such, at times GPU and CPU utilization can be strange. But our GPU stayed cooler, around 55 to 60 or so Celsius. The CPU hit a max of 87 Celsius, but stayed around 83 for most part, minus some raid fights where it hung around 85. And of course, and most importantly, no PC test for WoW would be complete without checking out how great our FPS is when we stare into a rock. And there it is, peak gaming performance. Does this Lunchbox even have a weakness? Last but not least, we have Rocket League. On all the highest settings with VSync turned off and the frames uncapped, Rocket League ran from 300 FPS to well over 400. It was a bit silly, but truly a gamer moment. I mean, we didn't even have to stare into a rock this time. Our GPU hit a max of 74 Celsius, but mostly sat around 72 to 73. Our CPU hit up to 86 Celsius, but was at 84 for most of the bench. Turning on VSync, the GPU temps dropped to around 60. However, it had no effect on the CPU's temperature. I would definitely suggest to limit your frames here, as there is no reason to make your system run warmer and work harder for insane frames. But then again, I am not your parent, do whatever you want. As we keep finding time and time again, our little Lunchbox is a 1440p powerhouse of gaming. You may ask yourself, if such a small ITX Lunchbox costs more to build, has higher temperatures, and can be more loud because of its aggressive fan curves, what is the point? Why build one of these? Well, there is a number of reasons to build such a tiny form factor PC. For one, it is great for a living room setup to use as a powerful console. It is small and tiny and can fit anywhere. This fact also makes it great for traveling or if you enjoy LAN parties. You can grab the handle and take your PC gaming addiction anywhere. Lastly, it's cool as heck to have and fun to build. The fact that such a tiny PC the size of a Lunchbox is a 1440p powerhouse is fantastic. If that does not impress you, I just don't know what will. Our goal today was to review this Lunchbox, to see if such a tiny form factor PC was viable, if it and its parts could handle the heat. And our conclusion? Well, yes, of course it can. This PC is small and performs wonderfully. It can get a little spicy, but you can always limit FPS to drop temps, and or undervolt both the GPU and CPU. Overall, this PC is just plain impressive, and so is the RX 6700 XT. Years after its launch, this card has become a wonderful budget GPU. Sadly, the stock to buy these new is dwindling and harder to find, but if you know what you're doing and what to look for, you can pick up a used one. On a last note, AMD's Adrenalin software is super clean and comes with so many different utilities. I do believe I prefer it over Nvidia's version. On a last note, RIP to the 7900 GRE that is now out of stock everywhere and no longer being produced. In my opinion, it was one of the best GPUs of 2024 in terms of price to performance, and it had an amazing name. I mean the Golden Rabbit Edition? That is 10 times cooler than your GPU's name, and you know it. Rest in peace, friend. Rest in peace. Thank you for watching. Make sure to like and subscribe.